was a civil rights attorney for 30 years before running for the court. The reason that I wanted to become an attorney and represent plaintiffs in civil rights cases really comes from my personal experience. Growing up in a mixed-race family, my father was black, my mother's white, and they met at a time when it was illegal for them to be married in most of the country. They moved out to Washington State where they could legally marry, but that experience and many others really showed me how the law can be a barrier to opportunity, and that as a lawyer you can possibly try to open up doors and create more of a level playing field for everyone. So it was this deep and fundamental commitment to equal justice under the law, that made me want to be a lawyer and to have the opportunity to come to North Carolina and work with some amazing civil rights attorneys at what was Julius Chambers' firm in Charlotte, had a statewide practice, got to do incredible things with voting rights. Why did I decide to run for the court? It's because after the election of 2016, and you remember who won in 2016, it seemed kind of clear to me that our federal courts were not going to be as favorable a forum to enforce our rights. And that in fact we have a lot of rights under our state constitution, and that our state courts really matter. And as it turns out, that view has come to pass with our federal courts saying we're going to push back to the states important issues like partisan gerrymandering, important issues like the right to abortion. And now we see education being pushed back to the states. And education is actually something that is in the state constitution. Your right to all children's right to a sound basic education, and the right to a uniform system of public education, that's in our state constitution. It's not in our federal constitution. So the state courts really matter. And I'm going to say a little more about the cases that we decide, but what I want you to know is that even if you personally never have a case that comes to our court, we are deciding things all the time that is impacting your life. So things like how much you pay for electricity, whether or not you're going to get compensated if you're injured on the job, what happens if you're injured in a car accident, how are we going to protect our clean water resources across the state? Will Duke Power be able to charge you for the cost of cleaning up its coal ash spills? Environmental issues of compensation for injured people, questions about how much you have to pay when you go to the emergency room, and particularly if you're uninsured. All of these things are decided by cases that come to our court. And when I said a minute ago that what happens here impacts the federal level, understand that in 2022 we had a court. When I came on the court, it was 5 Democrats, 2 Republicans. We actually at one point were 6 Democrats, 1 Republican, and then we had 2 election cycles in which Democrats lost, Republicans won for our court. And in January 2023, that's the date at which our court flipped, and crucial decisions that we made in 2022, including the decision that extreme partisan gerrymandering violates the state constitution. Our court decided that fairly after a trial, after evidence, and in 2023, the new court reversed that, said we're going to hear this again, which is not normal. In fact, it hadn't happened in the 200-year anniversary of our court. We're going to hear this again, and we've decided that actually we can't make that decision. So they didn't say the districts aren't gerrymandered. They just said we as a court have no power to constrain what the legislature does. So in 2022, we had a congressional delegation that was 7 Democrats, 7 Republicans. After the court reheard the case, decided we can't put any constraints on the legislature went back, redrew. We now have 10 Republican, 4 Democrats in our congressional delegation. If that change had not happened, Congress right now would be in the hands of Democrats. So that is how important our state Supreme Court races are to what happens at the federal level as well. Similarly, the 2022 court said that because the state constitution guarantees a sound basic education, if the state legislature won't allocate enough money to provide a sound basic education, we, the court, have the obligation to enforce that right and to order that those funds be spent. In 2023, the court said, no, wait a minute, let's rehear that. And so immediately the funds were stopped. So the money that we ordered be spent in 2022 has not been spent. It's been on hold. A whole year later, in 2023, 2024, we had oral arguments. Here we are, almost the end of April 2025. You still don't have a decision from our court in that case. So that's what we're doing to education. I want to also just mention voting rights in the sense of voter ID, because this was another case where after trial, the trial court found that the law that the General Assembly passed to implement voter ID was intentionally racially discriminatory under our state constitution, and that you can't enforce a law that is intended to discriminate against black voters in this state. The new court in 2023 said, oh, let's rehear that. And they decided that it was actually okay under the state constitution. And in this case, they said, we're going to have it's going to be harder to prove intentional racial discrimination. We're not going to use the standard that the federal courts use. We're going to make it harder to prove race discrimination under our state constitution. And under that harder standard, we don't think this law is discriminatory. So that is the kinds of ways in which we have been impacting our democracy. We have such an opportunity now because if Justice Riggs is able to keep her victory, if I keep my seat in 2026, in 2028, 3 Republican seats on our court are up. Chief Justice Newby, Justice Berger, and Justice Berenger, all 3 of those seats are up. If Democrats can take those seats, we will have a 5-2 court that's 5 Democrats, 2 Republicans, a court that is committed to enforcing your rights, to upholding the state constitution, a court that will have the opportunity to make those kinds of rulings before the next round of redistricting. So unlike the U.S. Supreme Court, where you kind of have to wait a long time to change the court, we have a real opportunity with our state courts. So I want to also just tell you a little bit about current status of things you might be reading in the news. And here, I'm not going to comment on the cases. I'm not going to editorialize. I'm not going to say good or bad. I am going to give you information, which I'm allowed to do. And the information is, with Justice Riggs' case, Judge Griffin suing to throw out ballots, our court ruled, and here, I dissented, and I can tell you what's in my dissent, but our court ruled that the 60,000 votes that Judge Griffin was trying to throw out because the voter registration didn't have driver's license or social security numbers, our court said it would be unfair to throw those out because it wasn't anything the voter did. But they said it is permissible to not count, to throw out the ballots of military and overseas voters who didn't provide an ID. And understand they couldn't provide an ID because, number one, the Board of Elections told them they didn't need to because state law didn't require them to. Remember, the state constitution says you show an ID if you vote in person. There is a state law that says that overseas voters don't have to provide an ID. Nevertheless, our court said those ballots can be thrown out unless those folks come forward with an ID. So, and the other ambiguity, the other thing that is completely unclear is which counties are those voters coming from. Guilford County is the only county where Judge Griffin filed his protest in time. But he then said, well, I want to add Buncombe, Forsyth, and Durham. Are you seeing a pattern here? Yeah. Okay. And now he's also trying to add Cumberland and New Hanover. So there's a potential of 6 counties, but there's only agreement that 1 county was filed in time. So that is now percolating in the Court of Appeals. Judge Griffin has filed something with the Court of Appeals saying, because the Board of Elections, your state Board of Elections, took the position, Guilford County is the only one that's in time. Nobody has told us we're wrong about that. So Guilford County is the only county where we're going to not count those votes. And as I say in my dissent, whether it's 1 county, 4 counties, 6 counties, there's still 94 other counties in the state, right? And so if you are a military and overseas voter in Wake County, your ballot will count. It's not been challenged, it will count. But these challenged counties, unclear. So Justice Riggs went to federal court. And that is the ruling that you might have read about where earlier this week, the federal courts, the trial court said, the trial court and federal court said, we're going to go ahead with this cure process. We're going to go ahead with the process of finding IDs, finding those military and overseas voters. And the reason we keep saying military and overseas is because a lot of the military voters actually were never overseas. They just voted through a military process. So if you registered to vote in Guilford County, you're a member of the military, and you were out in Asheville helping with hurricane relief in November, you could vote through the military process, and your vote is now one that's being challenged. So there's some 1,400 voters in Guilford County who fall into this category of military and overseas. But the federal court had to give control over all the boards of elections to the state auditor, which was supposed to happen as of May 1st. A 3-judge panel said that that law violates the separation of powers doctrine and violates the state constitution. It was a 2-to-1 decision. There was a dissent. And that there's certainly the potential that that case will make its way up through the state court system. It is a purely state law question, so that case will likely never be in federal court. But that's the process and where that stands. It's not final because the appellate process has not been gone through. So there's a lot of lawsuits about our democracy, but what I want you to know is that Justice Riggs' commitment is to the voters of the state, and she says repeatedly that what matters to her is that every vote should count. And she's focusing on the unfairness of changing the rules after the election and throwing out ballots that were cast according to the laws that were in effect at the time they were cast. So I want to talk about what you can do in the midst of all this, because I think there's a really important role to play right now. Because even though those 60,000 that didn't have their data all straight with the Board of Elections, those were only early votes, okay? There are estimates that upwards of 400,000 voters in this state fall into that category of the Board of Elections doesn't have a unique identifier for them. And so the potential exists for anyone who's running, whether we're talking about municipal elections in 25 or our midterm elections in 26, there's potential for continued challenges in this way. And so I think it's really important that we find those voters whose information is not up to date and make sure that their registrations are completely valid. So that's one step. So how do you find them? So the first place to go is the griffinlist.com. And the Griffin list, so this is that the North Carolina Democratic Party has been phenomenal in supporting us statewide judges who are running for the Supreme Court for the Court of Appeals. There are 3 Democratic seats that will be on the ballot in 26 for the Court of Appeals. My seat on the Supreme Court is the only one on the ballot in 26. But Toby Hampson, John Arrowwood will be running to keep their seats. There'll be a 3rd candidate, and the party has put together a joint judicial fund. So if you wanted to fund all of the statewide judicial candidates, there's one central place you can contribute to, and they will be coordinating and working together to get the word out about our courts, to do canvassing and all those good things. And there's also a judicial caucus director. So Becca Zirkin is our judicial caucus director for the state party. And if you say you're having an event and you want one of us judges to come, you can contact Becca. She'll coordinate with all of us. She'll figure out who's available. She'll get us there. So there's really an amazing amount of work that the party is doing to support us. But my campaign is already underway. And so I've passed out information about my first event in Durham on May 30th. Would love to see you there. I promise I will also have events in Wake County if you don't want to travel one county over. And I'm trying to, the Wisconsin race, if you were seeing earlier in April, they spent over $100 million total in that state Supreme Court race. And Justice Riggs, for herself, raised over $5 million. So I have a huge hurdle. I have a huge demand that I have to meet just to be competitive, just to get the word out about who I am, why our courts matter, why people should be engaged. But the other thing I want you to remember is that in 2018, right, the midterm that happened after the last Trump election, Democrats swept all the statewide seats. It was a blue moon election. We did not have a state Senate seat on the ticket. So the state courts were the top of the ticket, were the only statewide seats on the ticket, and Democrats won all of those. And it was the highest turnout in a midterm up until that point, and it was actually higher than more recent midterms. So I know we can do this, folks. I know we can get out there. I know we can talk to voters. I know they care about what happens with our courts. And so I am enlisting all of you to help me in that effort. And I'm just so grateful to you for this time today. I would love to take any questions that you have. Thank you.
Go Anita Earls. My Twitter handle is #AnitaEarls2026 for the next 2 years. So, Justice Earls, does your campaign have a volunteer sign up?
Yes, it does, right on my website. Earlsforjustice.com. Thank you so much. I'm sure that Kimberly planted that question because I always forget to name my website. But it's Earlsforjustice.com. You can use the number 4 or the word 4, all one word, Earls for Justice, and you can sign up. You can donate. You can learn a little bit more about my background, and that's the best way to communicate. Thank you.